Hello. We are delighted to welcome Professor Harriet Hawkins, who is a senior lecturer in geography at Royal Holloway, University of London, for an interview to celebrate International Women's Day as part of our Ustinov Meets series. The theme for International Women's Day this year is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World, with the tagline, Choose to Challenge. And we are pleased to welcome Professor Hawkins to speak about her experience and career to date. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us today as part of the activities for International Women's Day. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career to date?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. First of all, it's obviously wonderful to be here and great to meet you virtually, and an honour to be invited to talk. I'm currently a professor of geography based at Royal Holloway in the University of London. So I'm an academic, and it's a really wonderful role. I get to work with my amazing colleagues and students in London, but also all the way around the world. And I basically as a geographer, I'm also an arts and humanities scholar. So my work sits at that intersection around what's called cultural geography or the Geo Humanities. And I'm currently, working on two key things. Firstly, a new 5-year project I just started, which is about art and underground spaces. So caves, caverns and urban undergrounds. And I'm also the director of an arts and humanities focused doctoral training partnership called Techne, which supports the work of 300 doctoral students working across the southwest of England, in London and other kinds of places. And we also work really closely with research partners, so museums, art galleries, organisations, people like Kew Gardens and so on. So that's kind of what I've been working on and what I'm kind of doing at the moment. Did you want more about my how I got to this point, or?
First of all, that sounds absolutely amazing. Those are incredible initiatives. And because the tagline of this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge, what would you say how would you interpret this for yourself personally and professionally, particularly in the context of these initiatives that you're setting up?
I know, it's really interesting. It's a really provocative tagline, isn't it? Choose to challenge. It made me think quite a lot when I came across it. I think for me, I guess I'm interested in two ways. I think firstly, for me, it's always been quite important to challenge myself, obviously in a kind way, but also keep pushing and keep putting myself in those contexts where you have to think critically. And while being an academic obviously has its challenges, it's also a really privileged position because I get to spend a lot of time thinking through quite hard about different sorts of problems and challenge myself around that. But I think the second resonance for me about Choose to Challenge, and I think something that's really salient for the kinds of work I've been doing more recently, especially the leadership roles with doctoral students, has been that sense that I think as leaders, we also need to think about how we choose to challenge injustices that we see. So not just taking a step back and thinking, oh, well, that's going on, but actually stepping in, refusing to just be a bystander and actively choosing to challenge problems that we see in the world and work out how to work together to tackle those. So I think it's a really poignant slogan for those kinds of reasons for me.
Oh, absolutely. That's a very, very lovely way of thinking about it. I think challenging injustices in particular. And could you tell us about why did you decide to specialize in the Geo Humanities? What drew you into this field?
Yeah, so the Geo Humanities is intriguing. It's an intriguing thing. It's a neodualism that's emerged in, I guess, the last decade or so to really describe work that's been around for a really long time. And by the Geo Humanities, it tends to mean research and arts practice that sits at the intersection of geography. So a discipline that cares about landscape, space, place, the environment, questions about the city, about inequality, about migration and mobilities, but linking that together with arts and humanities. So sort of hence the humanities bit. And of course, those are questions that might be around things like creativity, aesthetics, imagination. It's about those questions of thought. It's also about the kinds of resources, what you might choose to study. So it might be literature, it might be like yourself. It might also be, it might be art, the kind of artwork that I work on. It might also, of course, be kind of different forms of kind of creative practice-based research. And I think for me, I started off when I was at Nottingham, kind of trying. I started as a geography undergraduate, and I really wanted to also think about questions of art. I'd done a lot of art history, and I'd kind of left that behind. And I got to Nottingham. I was lucky enough to be able to do modules on the side. And what started off as something on the side became something I realised I could actually do all the time. So that became a master's and a PhD, and then a career. So it's been really, really interesting to kind of help work through in the context of geography, in the context of current concerns, both in the world more generally, but also within a kind of academic context, to think about how we address wicked problems. So whether that's migration, inequality, climate change, and how we address those problems. We need interdisciplinary thinking. So thinking that's about science, social science, and arts and humanities to really kind of grapple with some of those questions. And so for me, the Geo Humanities really lets me do that. It lets me bring together different things that I love, but also do so in a way that also tackles some of those really pressing questions that we really need to spend some time thinking about kind of collectively.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think a collaborative approach is so important. Given the importance of art and art worlds in society, and given your commitment and your work on well-being, how would you say art worlds can contribute to this agenda? How can we ensure that they remain accessible to everyone who could benefit from that proximity?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question, isn't it? I think that those questions around how we make art accessible, the questions around art and well-being. So a lot of my work is around asking the question, what might art do in the world and how does it do that work? Now, of course, for many kind of artists and creative practitioners, that sort of instrumentalization of art might not be what they're interested in. And that's totally fine. But as a geographer, I'm sort of interested in this way that art does things in the world, and it kind of also creates worlds and might make new futures. So I've done lots of projects, for example, that are about collaborating with communities and drawing on participatory research agendas to work using arts methods and artists with these communities to kind of address questions that might be important to them. And so I'm really interested in how we could continue to think through, in a way that so many people in the art world do, what it is that how art can kind of go into the world, I guess, beyond museums and do work in these kinds of ways. So obviously some questions about accessibility can be about bringing people into museums. Other questions of accessibility could be about taking kind of art beyond and culture beyond the museum's walls. And obviously the kind of COVID-19 pandemic has been really kind of demonstrating the really wonderful ways that numbers of sorts of theatres, art galleries, and different sorts of creative practitioners around the world have been really doing that and being able to do that through digital mediums. And I think that's been really, really kind of really interesting and exciting to see. So yeah.
I definitely think the COVID pandemic has made us look at accessibility to art in a very, very different way. As you have worked on a PhD ECR focused well-being program, and I would say, given the current global situation, there has never been like a more important time to kind of focus on well-being. Could you talk a little bit more about the program and why you established it, and what it has achieved so far, and what are you sort of hoping to continue to achieve in the future?
Yeah, thanks. It's really interesting to be able to talk about the program, actually. And yeah, one of the unfortunate things about the pandemic has been the sort of visibility that it's brought to these kinds of ongoing issues, and obviously their intensification. So the program really started years ago as it started actually as a writing group for kind of PhD students, where we would sort of get together and I'd share writing as a supervisor and everyone would share writing and talk about the kinds of challenges they were facing in their research. And what became really clear is the more that we talked, a lot of the problems were, of course, about practicalities of research and writing, but a lot of them were also the writing problems became a kind of lens for sort of other kinds of wider problems that might be about anxiety or imposter syndrome or, work-life balance issues or kind of, just sort of that really kind of general kind of group of problems that we know can kind of happen around doctoral study and early career work in particular. So as a result of that, we kind of formed another group, really, where we worked together. So I worked with the students to kind of draw up a list of topics, and then we went and found a series of resources and created workshops in which we would address these. And sometimes they were kind of, we would get in a sort of expert in the field to kind of offer, advice and support. Sometimes they would be quite discussion based. Sometimes they'd just be kind of like lunchbox chats. Other times they would be kind of fun workshops. So we did one that we worked, which was really fun actually, that uses feminist methodologies and what we basically did was everyone would draw around their body. So this was about imposter syndrome. So you would draw around the body on a big piece of paper, and then you had to put half your body, this ideal academic that you kind of imagined. So this person was extremely well read and very articulate and, kind of could be very calm and control a room and was excellent at teaching and could write perfect papers every time. But there's this perfect academic on one side of the body, which was kind of annotated and drawn. So, there'd be a perfectly neat stack of books, for example. And then the other side of the body was annotated and drawn with all the things that we all felt we were as academics, never read enough, always never kind of managing to answer the question in the right way, always, gesticulating too much when we talk, all those kinds of things that we kind of have, big and small fears about as academics, as scholars. So it's sort of, those kinds of workshop-based activities that were about helping to share and bring out into the open some of the things that we kind of worry about. And hopefully in doing so, make them kind of feel shared and therefore not necessarily, not reduce their importance, but at least recognise them as part of how we are in the world. But I think what was also quite important was that those sessions didn't necessarily require you to be involved. You could just sort of sit there if you didn't want to share, because obviously not everyone wanted to. And we also combined them with some yoga sessions done by a yoga practitioner from the department who was a member of staff there. So she did some yoga and yoga nidra breathing sessions as well sometimes. And then we had a thing called Shut Up and Write, which if you haven't heard about it, as anyone doing any kind of academic work or writing should know about it. It's effectively timed concentration sessions where you turn up, you set a timer for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and then you just write. And then you set collective goals and then you kind of share where you got to with your goals. So we would shut up and write sometimes as well, just to kind of collectively write together and share some challenges. So the programme really kind of had a range of different activities, and it evolved into a sort of series of different things. So the shut up and write sessions happen independently. Originally it was focused around my department and has now become something that different departments within the university do in different ways. It's also fed into various different ongoing programs as part of the doctoral training program I run. And a colleague of mine, Emma Brzezinski, who's also a trained therapist, has taken some of the ideas that we developed forward into something called the PhD Life Raft, which is a podcast that she's made. So if you want to check that out, that's also quite a really good resource. So it's been a really interesting programme to do. I think it's really great to see that it's something that has been done in other ways by lots of people around the world and within and without academic institutions. And so I think there's lots of other programmes like it basically. But yeah, going forward, I think it will continue to have a place. That certainly seems to be important. And I think one of the things that's unfortunate, obviously, in the pandemic, that we've seen more of these issues is it does feel like it's becoming more commonplace to talk about them, and it's becoming more okay to go, I'm not coping. And I think that's there's something very kind of productive about creating spaces in which people can acknowledge the struggles they have, and we don't all have to pretend that everything is okay all of the time.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing. That exercise about making your perfect academic, that sounds so fascinating. That's such an incredible initiative. And it is so important to be creating spaces where you can talk about not doing as well as you want. So that's amazing, that kind of pioneering that sort of space for people. And kind of tangentially related to that, on your university profile, you stated that you are committed to supporting future generations of scholars, which is incredible. So could you tell us, why is being a mentor important to you?
I think, well, I guess the simple answer is it's really vital and important to support our communities. And, I think especially, early career scholars need, we all need support at different stages in our careers. Mid-career scholars, senior scholars all need support too. But I think, there's those early stages where everything can be, a bit challenging and a bit unknown and a bit rocky. And I've certainly had amazing mentors when I was going through that stage, and I've still got amazing mentors. And, without them, I wouldn't have found my way through. So I think mentors, being a mentor and being mentored are both really, really important learning experiences. I think, I'm lucky I have mentors who are both, senior scholars, but also my own peers, some of my most valuable mentors, and, early career scholars I work with also mentor me in different ways. I think that the idea of reverse mentoring can be really, really, really productive and really, really valuable. But yeah. When we were allowed to walk during COVID, a colleague and I myself had COVID mentoring walks where we would take a time just to walk around, and we would just sort of listen to the other person kind of, talk through all the different things that were going on and kind of put it in perspective, because those kinds of little chats that we're all used to being able to have around work weren't happening. So actually that kind of very peer, very friend-based mentoring, which is what it is in a way, was really, really valuable.
That's amazing. It actually was going to be my next question.
Oh, sorry.
Did you have? So I was going to ask, what is the best advice you've ever been given by a mentor figure?
Yeah, no, it's really complicated, isn't it? I was thinking about this. I've got particular advice I was given by an academic mentor who basically said, you've got to work out all the different things you've got to do, and then you've got to remember to turn up for them all evenly. So, those points in your when you're trying to balance all your different priorities. And so that was very interesting. But I think one of the best bits of advice that I've ever been given is by one of the mentors I've really valued have been sort of being able to have the opportunity to hang around with and just work with really senior, in particular female scholars, both kind of academically and, in terms of leadership. And I think watching both of them and both the kind of really positive mentoring conversations you have, but also the examples they've set, have helped me really kind of refine, develop the kinds of scholar I want to be. And so rather than particular advice that they've given me, perhaps, what I like to kind of do is when I've got a challenge or a situation is sort of go, what would Katie do? WWSD, what would Sally do? And kind of like try and think, okay, how can I channel the kinds of ethics and ways of being in the world of this scholar that I really, really kind of value and appreciate, and use that to help guide my kind of practice. So, yeah.
That's actually a really good way of approaching mentorship. I mean, ideally, you'd be mentored by someone you want to emulate. Mm. So I'm kind of drawing this to a close. My final question for you is, if you could turn back and speak to yourself at 21 years of age, knowing everything that you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
Golly. Seek out people that you admire, but above all, persist. Just persist. It's, I think persist. It's a good word.
No, that's actually, that is amazing. I think it's something that a lot of people right now also need to hear. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for joining us today and for providing us with such insightful and engaging responses to our questions. It has been such a pleasure to speak with you today. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having the chance to chat to you. And I also would say I really enjoyed reading your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.